Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Determination, Deliberation, and Dragons, a podcast where we talk about creative writing with both determination and deliberation, and dragons. I am Peter, and that is Izzy.
Hello.
And we are going to talk about my fourth story in my series of Pana and Waveskimmer stories. This time we're going to be focusing specifically on characters. There's a lot of character things I want to talk about. And before we get into my story, we wanted to talk about two characters who really kind of fit into the story that I want to tell in how they are represented, portrayed, kind of the things that they go through. So as we think about my story, I want to keep these two other characters in the back of my mind. Well, in the back of all of our minds. So, Izzy, you kind of know these characters better than I do. Do you want to explain who we will be briefly talking about?
I mean, I've only seen the show through once, and I rewatched the first season once. But She-Ra is still one of my favorite shows. I'm just not much of a rewatcher. But the dynamic between Catra and Adora, the two protagonists, is, I mean, at least for the beginning seasons, from what I know of for your characters, very similar to the dynamic between Pana and this other character, Varé. Very used to be friends, but now toxic, sort of complicated enemies relationship.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I think a lot about with Catra and Adora is that they're constantly meeting up with each other. And, they're not just fighting necessarily, they're also having these discussions, and there's these moments where they are forced to work together, or not even necessarily forced, but sometimes they just do, and you kind of get more of a sense of what each is missing, what each of them wants, and what they're experiencing in that moment. So it just really kind of pushes that relationship and exploring what that's like for each of the characters. And that's kind of what I want to do with my story a little bit, to a much lesser degree. Because of course, I am not as good at writing characters, and I'm more focused on larger socio-political type of things. But as we were going through, Izzy and I both realized that, Pana and Varé, their story is very reminiscent of Catra and Adora, to the point where there was one moment in a later story that we haven't gotten to yet that is just super very like Catra and Adora. But I won't spoil that yet for all of you. But we'll talk about it when we get there for sure.
I have not read the story yet, but Peter was telling me about it, and oh man, it's so similar. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I had just watched a specific scene in She-Ra with Catra and Adora, and I based it off of that. At least, I'm pretty sure I did. I wrote this a while ago, so I don't remember everything. And as we will find out in this story too, there are things I just don't remember, and I have no idea what they're supposed to mean. So everyone, when you write, keep notes of what you're actually trying to do, because you might forget sometimes.
Yes, if there's a meaning to a character name, maybe write it down if you're attached to that meaning.
Yeah.
No, not from my own personal experience, but a friend does that. She writes down the character names and their meanings, so she remembers for the important ones.
Oh, that's good. I need to start writing a list. But anyway, moving on.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to tell us a quick backstory, or not backstory, a summary of the story?
Yeah, so to briefly kind of summarize this story, this is possibly a more fillery episode of our continuing Pana and Waveskimmer story.
Lies.
So, it's a good one, but I can see I kind of intended it at first to be a little bit more fillery, or character driven, not filler, but it's less plot driven and more character driven, I think. So
I personally believe
basically,
character driven is not filler.
that is fair. But basically, Pana and Waveskimmer are coming from that village of Ryotho that they had just visited, and they're in the woods by a waterfall trying to figure out how this magical stone thing works. Pana tries to learn how to swim because there's water now and everything isn't just ice. So that's cool. Swimming is fun, everyone. You should all do it. And then Varé comes. Varé is their old friend from their village who is now leading the hunt to find them. She's technically supposed to bring them back to the village, although there's some doubt as to whether or not that's what's going to occur. So there's a brief altercation by this waterfall. Pana breaks their arm or dislocates their arm,
They do
and
both.
yeah, both. Um, but they manage to escape with Waveskimmer, and then they realize that they left the magic stone back by the waterfall, so they need to go back, and they have another altercation. And there's a lot of like just talking with Varé, and well, I mean, not a lot of talking with Varé. Varé doesn't talk that much, but there's this altercation, and they go into like this tomb, and there's a bunch of like carvings and stuff, and ultimately Pana finds the stone and breaks apart like the cave ceiling, and like water floods in, and the stone saves them all from being flooded. Varé escapes along with another villager who had joined the hunt with her, and then everyone leaves, and it's not really that happy, but everyone's safe for now. Um,
Sort of. They're injured.
they're all injured, and I'm gonna keep them injured for the rest of the story because I feel like that's not something you ever see, and I really wanted to push that. So, I mean, that's more relevant for next story, I guess. But
Also, they don't have like hospitals and things, so it doesn't make sense.
yeah, there's no like secret, like Bacta tanks that you can just like put someone into and like have them heal overnight. So there's that. Oh, and we also get um while Pana and Waveskimmer are kind of hiding from Varé before they realize that the stone is missing, Waveskimmer like has a dream about his backstory. So you get to see where the dragons kind of have been living since like for the last couple hundred years. You see like where Waveskimmer was born, what it was like when he met Pana for the first time, and you get a little bit more about just like the history of Pana and Varé specifically and like what happened, or like I guess the idea that Pana stayed in the village for a year after the whole hunting party incident thing. So there's a little bit of like development there. And I think that's basically kind of it. Oh, and also just the villagers that were with Varé at first, who were helping to hunt down Pana, they all left or died. So now it's just her and one person named Kai, which is just a really great name. It's one of my favorite names, but that's irrelevant.
I also appreciate the name Kai. It does give me internal conflict to think, is it K? Is it Kai? K is the inferior version, in my opinion, but some people pronounce it that way. But I like Kai.
Oh, it is Kai. It is just such a good name. There's a villain in Kung Fu Panda named Kai, a person in Legend of Korra.
Wait,
I
who
just
in
love the
Korra?
name. It's that little like airbender guy in season 3 who's
I
the
ask
thief.
as I ask as if I'll remember, but I don't remember.
No, he's good. Yeah, and I just like know someone from Vassar who's named Kai, which was like just super cool.
I
It's
didn't
a
know
great name.
them. I knew everyone you knew, obviously. Of course.
Absolutely. That's how the world works.
I think that's interesting. When you mentioned the broken arm thing, I was also thinking, well, one, as I was reading the story, I was like, they have incredible pain tolerance. How do they do it? is it a story device or adrenaline? But other than that, I do appreciate that you want to keep their arm and Pana's arm broken and Vare's wrist broken. Varé broke her wrist. Because there's no way they would be healed. They don't even have like splints.
Yeah, I just feel like in most stories we don't get this sense that injuries are lasting or that they impact people all that much. Even in like, I mean, in She-Ra, like the characters get thrown against things and like they go through a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like in the next scene they're all like unscuffed and just ready to go. And that's not a criticism of She-Ra. That's like every single story basically.
Yeah.
Um,
No, plot armor is thick. And magic exists in She-Ra and other stories. Many stories are just like, magic healing, let's go. Paralysis, it's cured.
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, I mean, there's a few stories that like that I'm aware of that have started to try to push that a little bit more. So I don't know. You've watched The Dragon Prince, right?
That part pissed me so much. I did not like what they did with Soren.
But at least it's like a little bit kind of pushing this idea that injuries are real,
Yeah,
sort
but
of.
then they do the magic healing. I mean, it is still something that probably wouldn't have even been focused on before. But then they're
Yeah.
like, we still can't have an actually disabled character, so we're gonna heal him.
Yeah. So we're just talking about in The Dragon Prince, this one character like breaks his back after fighting a dragon. And it seems like they're actually going to have this character whose injury sticks with him. And it does for a while, I think for like the majority of that episode.
It was
And
one
then like,
episode.
yeah. But then like his sister goes and like does this dark magic spell and like heals him. But like she has to sacrifice a deer to do it. And
It's
like her
messed up.
hair gets all like I think her life force is probably draining away to some degree. Like her hair turns white. I don't know what's happening with that. But so yes, like it is super disappointing. Like you almost have this like really interesting idea in the show, but I think more so than other shows and movies and books that I'm aware of, they kind of played with this idea that like, oh, injuries are important, and in order to heal those injuries, like you need to really put more effort into it than like going to the Pokemon Center and like putting your torched like Trico into a little machine and it like it beeps a few times and everything's good again. So it's like a little bit harder to heal this one character's injuries than it is for like most other characters in like every other story, which was interesting.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I kind of just like wanted to really push that and be like, hey, like Pana broke their arm and they're not gonna just like find a magical like healing spring and like be okay in the next story.
Mhm. I do think, well, I of course I appreciate that because it's like people are humans and we're not just machines that can keep going even with broken arms or even a paper cut. Like I burned my finger the other day and it's been like 3 weeks and now it's better. And it's like it's been affecting the use of my hand for 3 weeks and it was just a tiny burn. So humans are fragile.
Yeah, and we all need to like take care of ourselves and rest and not just like dive head on into another injury inducing situation.
Mm-hmm. And I do understand there's so many plot and magical or supernatural reasons that you can say my character has super strength. Even though they're injured, they can get on with it. Um, which you can definitely build characters that way. But I think it's the easier way out.
Yeah. I mean, there's ways in which it works.
Yes.
I'm now thinking of like Legend of Korra though, where Korra has to like relearn how to walk and everything and like move her toes. And that takes like 3 years to
Oh,
just
it
like,
did?
I mean, not the like learning to walk part. I think that took the better part of like a year. But in order for her to like completely heal from like the physical and mental trauma of her like past experiences. It took like around 3 years.
I totally forgot so much time passed in Korra. It's been a long time since I watched that.
Yeah. But I think like just for me on this topic of injuries, like I mean that's one of the reasons why I love Korra and why I'm kind of pushing for it in this story. Like I broke my femur when I was 4 and like I didn't just jump up the next day and like go back to riding my bike. It took a few months and I had to relearn how to walk. So, yeah, I'm really good at walking now. I learned how to do it twice. So, but just like seeing that and kind of witnessing characters who like go through the same thing, I think is really just interesting. Not that like again, not everything needs to be super realistic and like adhere to what we experience in our everyday lives, but I think I want some characters who do, because right now there are like none.
Hmm. Yes. And I also appreciate because it makes them feel a little more relatable to me. Not that I've ever had such a major injury that required months of rehab personally, but just the feeling of like this person's a person and can't just get up. They have, you know, they're not just, I guess I'm coming more from the mindset of like, I do love, at times I love seeing the invulnerable protagonist who has plot armor and, only gets shot in the shoulder and it's just a graze. And I'm like, yes, go beat the people who are somehow missing shooting your vital organs or even getting shot in their vital organs and they're just like, it's a flesh wound. Like sometimes that's the kind of story I need to see or I need to read. But sometimes I do very much appreciate having a character who is more on, my level of like, I just rolled out of bed and now it's a big chore to just brush my teeth.
Yeah, we can't all be, Darth Maul getting cut in half and returning a little while later to retake over the criminal underworld.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
For
but
those
that
of
that is
you,
a tangent.
for those of you who aren't big in the Star Wars thing, Darth Maul comes back in like the end of the Solo movie, and I don't know what else he's in.
Oh, yeah, no, Clone Wars, spoiler alert, he survives past episode 1 despite not having a lower body. Um, so yeah, things happen in Star Wars and they often unhappen as a result of the writers. But yeah, not to make that into a huge tangent.
I back to the injury thing, like, but in the friend through the friendship lens, which is our original lens, uh, our original theme is finally reappearing. I thought it was really cool and maybe intentional, maybe unintentional that Varé and Pana both injured some part of their arm. I don't know if they were the same arm. No, Varé injured her right wrist and Pana dislocated
Left
and
arm.
broke their left arm. So it's like opposite arms. But I thought it was interesting that they both had sort of injuries, but they're not quite proportional. Like Pana is much more injured than Varé, but it was kind of a sharing of pain because like there's pain on both sides of their relationship for their friendship that is pretty much broken now from what I can see from just the 4 chapters that have been shown to me. But I think there is something there with they're not physically okay and they're also like emotionally not okay either.
That's 100% exactly what I was thinking of when I wrote that. No questions asked. No, I mean, I think that's a great point. And a lot of times, characters and their appearance and the physical traumas they go through is a way to represent all that other stuff. So I think that is a really good point. Like there's definitely an aspect of their previous friendship that is very much broken. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not that, of course, using like a physical injury or something as metaphor or symbolism for inner trauma or whatever does not always work and can be done badly, just as any other thing can be written badly. But I thought it was interesting from what little I do know, you know, the way the external can reveal the internal, of how, like, when Varé breaks her wrist, her reaction was, I'm going to ignore this pain, and it will literally take a lightning storm to convince me to stop pursuing Pana. And it's like she disregards the needs of her own body so much that she just barely
Yeah.
waits for her wrist to be bandaged before she goes back on the hunt. And Pana kind of does the same thing, but for different reasons, because Pana has a much more significant injury, a dislocated and broken arm. And they do sit and wait it out for a little bit, but then they're immediately like, we got to go back and find the rock that they lost. Which, the rock is a very important rock, but they could have just sent Waveskimmer, now that I think of it. Like, Pana didn't have to go to get the rock themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think so definitely the way that they deal with their injuries, like that was more purposeful. And yeah, I mean Varé like is totally just like obsessed with the whole chasing down Pana and bringing Pana back to the village to like face justice sort of thing. So she's really not thinking much about herself. And I think we're going to see that a lot in this story, like just the ways in which like obsession can kind of lead you to disregard your own well-being. And that's kind of where Kai comes in to, you know, sit Vari down and be like, hey, like, no, you need to like heal, like we need to like, you know, bandage your wrist at the very least before you go and like, you know, scale a cliff to go and find Pana. And Pana does run away and like hides and tries to heal up and only, you know, returns after they've at least bandaged their arm to the best of their abilities and has had at least some time to like recuperate. I mean, there's also, like you said, they do kind of rush back to go and collect the stone. But I mean, I guess you could read that as also like being obsessed with the stone. Actually, maybe that is the way I want to read it. I'm not sure. There is this sense of like Pana not necessarily, I mean, they're still thinking about themselves and like what they want to do and what is best for their body in that moment and like what is best for them. Like they do take the time to like rest and tell Waveskimmer like, hey, I don't really want to talk about Vari right now. Like let's rest today. But then like, you know, at the end of the day there are still things that you need to do and like tasks that you need to complete. And maybe it isn't an obsession and maybe it is just, you know, this idea of like, you know, I've done what I can for me in the moment and waiting any longer is really gonna hurt more than it will help because we do need to go and collect this stone and make sure that we can use it for good.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, now that you're talking about obsession, um, and I'm thinking responsibility, it's reminding me a lot of Lord of the Rings and the Ring, which it very much, for those of you who don't know, which I think is not many people have at least a passing knowledge of Lord of the Rings, but they have to take this very important, powerful magic ring and go and destroy it. And it's a big, long journey. And one person, Frodo, is responsible for carrying the ring to the giant volcano. And it's this burden that he carries for the entirety of the series. But I'm thinking The Rock, in some ways, is kind of like that, where it's both a responsibility for the good of everyone that Pana looks after and takes care of this rock. And the rock is not necessarily a thing of evil like the ring is. We don't have that confirmed yet. Um,
It is not. It is just a cool rock that does whatever I want it to do.
so the rock is cool, but there definitely does seem to be some idea of responsibility, but at some personal cost. And for Frodo, the personal cost was ginormous, and he never recovered after being the ring bearer. I don't know if that's going to be the same for Pana, but there are some responsibilities that it's like there does require a certain amount of personal sacrifice that sometimes can't be recovered from.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's as big of a thing as the ring in Lord of the Rings, but I mean, any responsibility to a certain degree comes at the cost of the self.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, to varying degrees, like, writing your taxes is a responsibility, and it comes at the cost of like, you taking the time to do it, and putting some of your money into the greater good, into like your community. So, and that's different from like the responsibility of raising a child, which is, just incredibly mentally and like emotionally just exhausting at times. Despite it, like it is rewarding too, but particularly the parts of it that cost you, like, it can be a lot to go through and like be responsible for the entire life of a person. So the stone is definitely something that Pan is responsible for. And I think it's important that in story two, when they got the stone, like it was sort of a choice. Like they weren't forced to, take the stone with them. And the character Celston was like, "Yeah, you're not a chosen one. Like if you say no, like I'll find the next person who I think is okay and like give them the stone." So there is like this element of choice, and they can like put it down when they want to, but they've made it into this responsibility where they've seen parts of the world now, and they're learning more about themselves, about Waveskimmer, about the world, and how they all can help one another. So it is going to take, a lot of work. And Pana really does feel responsible for the stone and like wants to go and collect it when they think they've forgotten it back in the cave. So yeah, we'll see at what cost like it comes at.
Yeah, I have no idea. But this is making me think of back to the friendship. Like Shira, Adora makes choices that Catra just cannot understand at the very beginning. Adora decides to leave the Horde, where she and Catra were raised and trained to be soldiers, and it was not a happy upbringing. And Adora eventually decides to leave that, and Catra just never understands that decision that she makes for the majority of the show, and feels like Adora abandoned her when Adora was making a choice based on her own needs, and gave Catra the choice to come with her. But Catra at the time couldn't understand it and couldn't make the same choice with her, with Adora. So their relationship fractures because of that. But for Pana and Varé, it's making me think Pana also leaves the village, although not immediately leaving the village after discovering the dragons and meeting Waveskimmer. But their priorities, I guess, change a little bit more gradually. Adora and Catra's severance or whatever is very abrupt. Adora is like, wow, the Horde's evil, and literally decides in less than 24 hours to leave. And whereas Pana takes an entire year to make that decision. But it does seem to me like the priorities and perhaps responsibilities that Pana is willing to assume changes over that time from what Varé has. And they started out on the same page, more or less, of like, we both love our village and living here, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives here, to Pana feeling like, I'm going to leave and travel with Waveskimmer. This place is, I don't know exactly what reasons Pana had for leaving other than wanting to see the world and leave the village.
I mean, that was all. So like Pana didn't choose to leave. That was
Oh,
the whole. Um,
oh,
yeah, they went on like the hunting party, and then they discovered the existence of dragons, and like the dragons then like exited the cave and like proceeded to kill most of the hunting party people. And Varé was like the only survivor who like saw what had happened. But I mean, she didn't realize that like Pana didn't like set the dragons on everyone, but that's what she thinks happened. So Pana like goes back to the village, and they try to like figure out how to tell everyone and how to like live with everyone. And then it gets to the point where Varé finds Pana with Waveskimmer again and convinces like the rest of the villagers to get rid of Pana, that Pana is like a menace and has this weird connection with the dragons that is a risk to everyone. So Pana's like forced to flee.
Okay.
Um, which is kind of, I mean, it is very different from Adora, because like Adora ultimately realizes that the Horde is like evil, and like, the village that Pana comes from is not evil. They're just people who are scared, and rightfully so. Like, a lot of people died because of the dragon incident, and they all think Pana's responsible. So that's all fair. And I think there is this sense in She-Ra where, like, I mean, we are mostly on Adora's side, and even though we all love Catra, I think it's pretty clear that she is in the wrong and that she needs to do like a lot of introspection. I really wanted to make that not the case here and like push the idea that even though Pana didn't do anything wrong, I don't think Varé is doing anything wrong either necessarily. Like, yeah, she could, talk to Pana and get Pana's perspective on things, but I think based off of the information that she has, it's reasonable to think, it's reasonable for her to think that Pana's this scary, potentially threatening figure.
Okay. I mean, I would question, how do we know that? Why? I wonder why Vare would assume that Pana could communicate with dragons to the point where they could set the dragons on the villagers, and why would she assume that Pana would be motivated to do that in the first place?
Well, she saw, I don't know about motivation, but she saw Pana with Waveskimmer in the cave. Both like that first time when Pana and Waveskimmer like first meet,
Mm-hmm.
and all the villagers like walk in and there's just like Pana with a dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And then that moment is like immediately followed by the rest of the dragons emerging from the cave and like killing most of the people. So a lot of it is like circumstantial and just like what you see and like what you experience. And then I guess, there's a year of Pana just behaving like really strangely and just, you know, trying to navigate the whole like, village life after this event occurs. And then Vari eventually finds them with the dragon again, which really I think kind of pushes her like off the edge.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I would say most of this in between year hasn't been revealed for the story parts that I've read, so I guess I'm still catching up to like how Vare could be thinking and feeling. A lot of her characterization is a question mark to me because she's a very intense person from what I have seen, but I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I think the intensity is just like her character,
Mm-hmm.
and there's less of like a reason why that comes about. Just the focus on Pana and all that stuff is really just about, her seeing the whole hunting party incident. But I don't think too much happens in like the year between the incident and Pana leaving, except like it's really just Pana being unable to like integrate back into village life and like having this whole like weight on their shoulders of what happened, and then eventually like being discovered with the dragon again. So, but other than that, like I don't think there's anything too, momentous that like occurs. There's not like a single moment where it's like
Mm-hmm.
Ovare suddenly like really shifts in her thinking.
Mm-hmm. It sounds more like, I mean, obviously they grew up in the village together, so they would have known each other for their whole lives, pretty much. But I guess it sounds more like instead of like a giant chop with an axe to the relationship, like in Adora and Catra's case, it's more like a slow, steady, complete erosion of trust.
Yeah, like imagine if Adora had, or if Catra had seen Adora with the rebels, and then like there's a huge rebel attack like right then and there. But then Adora like goes back to the Horde, and it's a year of like her trying to defend her actions and be like, "Oh, I wasn't doing anything with those rebels. Like I didn't set them on the horde." And just like a year of those conversations and Catra being a person who is like just really distrustful, I guess.
Hmm.
So it's this gradual just like breaking down of relationship,
Hmm.
which I think is like very, at least in my experience, I think is more realistic than like just, one moment usually.
Now that makes a lot more sense to me because, especially for someone you care about, it's difficult to do a one and done, throw this relationship and this person out of my life. It's really difficult to just do it all at once like that without
Yeah.
being, shown time and again like this relationship is not working in a lot of small or bigger ways.
I mean, and we see that with Catra, because even though the relationship is technically done,
Hmm.
we see that it's not done.
Uh-huh.
And there's this continuous joke between her and Adora where like they'll meet up and Adora is like, "Oh, you let me escape because you like me." So they continue to like navigate that, and I don't think their relationship. I mean, their relationship is pretty much done, but I think there's elements of it that remain, and they continue to like, I don't know, push that, like experience that, and
I would say their relationship isn't done, but just the friendship that they had before is done, and
yeah,
it's a different stage or form, which for a good portion of the show is just technically enemies and antagonist, but they still remember.
yeah. But then you have like these big moments where like Catra's like, okay, I'm gonna like destroy the world now, and then like, then the next episode she's back to like, oh, I don't like you, Adora, but I'm not gonna like kill you right now because I'm having too much fun talking to you. Um,
Yep. We haven't
Catra's great.
seen as many haven't seen as many moments like that with Varé and Pana, but they haven't interacted as much yet. But I love those moments.
Yeah, I don't think like I have that many moments with them. Again, I mean, Shira has much more airtime and story time than like my stories do. Um, and the writers are like much better writers, and I'm still, figuring things out and like working on developing my own writing.
I mean, it's a
So
team of writers. It's not one person.
that too, I don't know how I would deal with a team of writers. I feel like I would be very frustrated just based off of my experience with writing comedy sketches with other people. But
Group projects, hooray.
group project, oh yeah, no, I hate group projects. They are the worst. They create enemies. They're just not good for anything, except when they work out, which I guess that might happen with some of you.
I think you and I did a group project once.
We did the bird class.
Yeah.
I remember really being frustrated with it. um, and like obviously we're friends now. I remember that. I mean, we weren't necessarily friends though, because that was like our first semester of college ever.
Yeah. I mean, I would say we were friends, but we'd only known each other for like 3 months at that point. So,
Yeah. I think I liked you more after the class ended. But
yeah.
that's like not a you thing. That is a me like despising anyone I do a group project with.
No, I
Which is something I need to work through.
I did well, I wasn't particularly the most invested in that class either. I I liked the final product we had, but yeah, I think I was also like we should have had some group meetings, more group meetings than we did, which I don't know if we had any. But now we're doing a much longer group project. So I guess that initial group project on the whippoorwill didn't completely ruin the future.
No, and this is much more enjoyable. Yeah, and I think too, like, I mean, I've gotten better at group projects since then. So,
No,
and you're just, you're insightful and incredibly smart. So this is
aw,
working out better.
thank you. No, I couldn't do, well, this podcast was your idea in the first place, Peter.
Credit.
It would not exist without you asking me, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do this?
And just pushing everyone to do it, you and Ling Shu.
Listeners, thank Peter for this podcast existing.
You're welcome. Um, okay, I'm trying to think about story-related things now.
I mean, I would say I don't know how toxic Pana and Vare's relationship is. Does not seem at the level of like insanity that is Catra and Adora's relationship for obvious reasons. The stakes are not quite as high as war, although the stakes are still kind of high. We just only Pana knows about that. Varé doesn't really know about the end of the world thing.
Well, Pana doesn't know that quite yet,
Oh yeah,
because right now at this point, I mean, they have the stone, and they don't realize that there's like potentially more apocalypses on the way. They just know that the stone, like, theoretically has the power to bring humans and nature like back together and to like save people.
like Nausicaa.
Um, Sort of, yeah. From like a very, although Nausicaa has like a very specific threat in it, Pana's still like unaware of the specifics and is like, oh, generally speaking, this stone has the power to help people.
Yeah.
But I think the stakes for their relationship, though, are a little bit more specific. And you see like Kai and Varé talking. Kai isn't necessarily like 100% going to stick with the plan of bringing Pana back to the village. Like there is this discussion of, making Pana atone for the whole dragon thing out on their search. Because like so Kai, her father was on the hunting trip and he died. He was killed by a dragon. So Kai is like very angry and is kind of just dark at times and is like, oh, like we need to like kill Pana too.
I kind of thought
Um,
Varé was like, yes. Or she didn't say yes, but like, I thought they were on the same wavelength with that.
at this point, I think Varé kind of is. Like I think she's telling herself that like they both need to bring Pana back to the village. I don't think she would mind at this point. I mean, she would mind. Um, and obviously, if she did kill Pana, like, she would be really distraught for a while. But I think in their mind, like, they're also okay with the idea that they might need to kill Pana.
Okay.
So, like, the stakes are pretty high in that, death may occur, which is not good. I mean, it probably won't occur just because I don't like that. Generally speaking. I've killed off like way too many characters already. Um,
Who's died?
I mean, like no one named,
Oh, I mean,
just like the random villagers, but I feel
I
very
don't,
guilty about that.
I don't know if I count them. We never
See,
met
I
them.
count them, every one of them. But
How
no,
many
so
were there?
oh, I don't know. But that's something I don't really like killing off characters if I can help it. But yeah, so I don't know necessarily if it's like toxic in the same way that Catradora is, where like Catra keeps like flip-flopping back and forth and like does some pretty messed up things and whatnot. So I think with Pan and Vare, like yes, it is toxic and it's horrible and they need to like talk things through. But I think it's a lot more simple, like it's a little bit more streamlined, where like Vare has this particular image in her mind of what happened with Pana, and she wants to proceed based on that perception.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that fits with what I do know of her character so far. You obviously know your own character much better than I do.
Right, but it's more of like, this thing happened, therefore I am going to do this, and possibly maybe this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's incredibly complicated or just as hectic as Catradora is.
That's just another level.
Yeah.
I don't think all, I mean, I do appreciate that in some cases, but I don't think all friendships that break apart have to be that level of complicated. Because sometimes it just is, it's painful enough to just have a friendship end.
Hmm. Well, Adora really just needs to end it and get rid of Catra's phone number. Not that that's a real thing. That's just like the image I have. But yeah, so I guess we'll see more about that moving forward. I did want to ask briefly just about your perception of Kai because you said that she was great, or not I think we were talking and I was like, oh, she's just like a supporting character, doesn't really do much, and you were like, no, I don't know if that is still true.
At this point, I don't feel like I have a very strong impression of her. I like her appearance, although I have questions about how it's possible, but I like the anime white hair and pale skin.
She looks like an icicle.
Uh-huh. I like that. I appreciate the if you don't watch anime, but I appreciate the anime girl representation and short hair. I don't know enough about her to have a very strong impression. I mean, I kind of got because Varé has had more page time, I got the idea that Varé was more extreme than Kai, and that Kai was like, yeah, I'm very angry, could kill Pana, let's do it if it comes to it. But I got the idea that Varé had much deeper anger.
I think Varé is like probably more dangerous, even though Kai is the one who's like talking a big game right now. Yeah, because right now Kai is just like, oh, Pana killed my father, so like let's get them back for that. I think Vari definitely has like, a more personal connection with Pana. And it's just like scarier to me at least.
Mm. No, definitely Kai. I mean, she has justified reasons for being angry and everything. Her father was killed. At least at this point, I would say her character hasn't been developed enough for me to feel like she is very as threatening. She's not the one who it took a lightning storm to convince her to stop pursuing Pana. Like she's not at that level of obsession as we've seen yet that Varé is already at. She's still,
Yeah.
within the bounds of reason, even though all the other villagers turned back and Kai didn't turn back. I still think she's more on the reasonable side of things than Varé slash Catra is, because that sort of obsessive quality is definitely shared between them.
Yeah. I kind of I mean Kai is sort of the Scorpia in the situation. Not I mean Scorpia, no one is like Scorpia,
Scorpia is an angel.
but yeah. But I definitely was thinking like when I was trying to come up with Kai, and I don't know if this like is true in the following stories because I think I wasn't hugely consistent with Kai, but we'll see moving forward. But I definitely like pictured her as like the Scorpia in the background who is like more invested in this because of Varé than like for her own purposes, which right now isn't necessarily the case. Although we can already see like I guess the start of that in in the way that Kai wanted Varé to stop and like to bandage her hand and like make sure Varé was okay
I would
before
say
going
that
to Gapana.
I would say that's more just for practical reasons. You'd have to be out of your mind to let somebody with a broken wrist go scale a cliff.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is definitely practical. That's why I'm saying like I don't think we're necessarily there yet, but in my mind it was like the beginning of kind of Kai could be obsessive as well, but she's choosing practical over obsessive because of RA. So it's not necessarily like, oh, she is a practical person. It's a deliberate choice to be practical in this
Mm-hmm.
one, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. I would say I'm thinking not that Varé is like villain material per se, but she's definitely set up as the antagonist. And not Varé, Kai is definitely the hench person, very henching. And the hench person has to be filling in certain practical roles, even if they're also wanting to get the protagonist and kill them.
Pretty much, yeah. Okay. Do you want to just talk like a little bit about the landscape there and like the tomb thing and the
Oh,
caves?
I forgot what my thoughts were on that. Yes, but maybe you could start so I can remember.
So a lot of the story takes place in these caves that also act as a tomb. So Pana and Varé, like they see these carvings, they see statues, and it's basically like a mass. I don't know if it's a mass grave site or if it's like a tomb to a specific person, but all of the statues are of like soldiers. They all have like their guns, their short military caps and stuff, their short like buzzed hair, and
I was imagining
I
this
don't.
very differently.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I
um,
definitely was imagining it warlike, but still different.
I mean, how were you imagining it?
I mean, when you said short hair, I kind of pictured like a short bowl cut for some reason.
Okay,
I
no,
mean,
they
I
are.
was thinking if it's carved onto rocks, it would show up better if it was like a bowl cut because if it's just short hair that like conforms to the shape of your head, you couldn't see that in a rock carving.
Unless it's a very good rock carving.
I
I don't know.
don't remember them having hats, but they could have had hats.
I think some of them did, but I mean, it doesn't matter too much.
Yeah, I thought the tomb was very interesting. My first thought was like, um, well, I wanted to talk about this. This is the line that I chose so that I could talk about it for when we share our favorite lines. But I was thinking, why does it have? I mean, you're obviously it has to be a tomb because the author chooses for it to be a tomb, so it's a tomb. But being the reader, I was like, but why did the characters have to interpret this place as a tomb? It could just as easily be like a bunker or you know a historical site or of cultural significance. Because I'm like thinking more from anthropological sense of like anthropologists get things wrong all the time where they're just like I know exactly what this carving means and choose to interpret it through from their own contemporary lens, with their own biases that they bring with it. So I was like, but why is this a tomb? It could just as well be something else just because you think it's a tomb. But obviously, it is a tomb because you say it's a tomb. But that's was my reaction at least when I read it.
I mean, yeah, like now that I'm thinking about it, how would they know it is a tomb? Um, I mean, and they don't know, like they suggest that it might be, but they definitely like don't have anything similar, up in the ice where they're from.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess I definitely just wanted like that feeling of like being in a tomb.
Mm-hmm.
And like I don't know if you get this at all, but like when I'm near like a grave site or like a graveyard, I get like this weird feeling. Not that there's anything like paranormal there, like that's not what I'm talking about. Um, but just definitely like I don't know, like this kind of like chill that I'm like trespassing in someone's like private area. Like they're off being dead and they don't need me like walking all over them. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but I feel like there's just this specific feeling attached to tombs and graves and places where dead people are. And I guess like I kind of wanted that in there and like I don't know, maybe the characters kind of felt that too. Like they have all these statues of these people and they're like I mean already the sense that like this thing is like hundreds if not thousands of years old. Definitely like the carvers, whoever like sculpted the statues, like they're all dead. Like this place is dead even if it's not for a like even if it's not for someone who had died, the place itself is kind of like this tomb of the past, like showing this not thing that happened, but like I don't know, like this place that once was, sort of. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I definitely just wanted something that like was past and had an ending to it.
Mm-hmm. No, I very
Yeah,
much appreciate that. I definitely like that. the vibe is definitely there. And I guess that was my pushback for why it was a tomb necessarily, because for me, you can definitely still have that feeling, and I definitely have that sort of. It's very similar vibe to being in a graveyard or adjacent to a graveyard, or being in like an abandoned building, or near where I am right now. There's a mall that's completely shut down, and going past it is like creepy because it's like what once was but is not now, and you can feel not a whole lot of history from the mall. I don't know anything about it, but you know what something used to be there, and lives used to be lived in this particular spot and aren't anymore. And a graveyard is definitely a very similar vibe, but I guess my reaction was like it didn't have to be a graveyard, but because also I guess I was thinking of it along the lines of like the idea of lives being lived in the and now are not is a slightly different feeling from like a graveyard where this is where the dead are kept, and lives are not necessarily lived in this space. It's just where the dead are allowed to be, or where we recognize and remember them, which is a slightly different feeling. But definitely I do get like my brothers and I would used to like hold our breath in the car when we passed a graveyard, and just for fun, but also to like not let the spirits go inside us or whatever. And it does have a feeling of remembering what came before, and knowledge of like these are people there, or people were. I don't know if you consider the body the. I don't know. I'm not going to get into weird philosophy stuff, but
Yeah, I think the idea of it being like a mall or something, and that having like a similar but different feeling is really interesting.
mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking like the death of a place,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, with like memories and things, and like, yeah, I don't know. So like maybe that could have been accomplished if I like had chosen something else that wasn't a tomb.
I think a tomb is still important too. Um, it serves the purpose. I think my thought had been more on like if there had been conversation, it's like I wonder what this place was, because this is a network of caves in this near this waterfall, and they're like, I wonder what this was. Maybe this was used for like religious purposes, or maybe people used to live here, or maybe it's a tomb, and it being one of the options, and leaving it a question of like how did these people live? We know so little about them.
I mean, I definitely know that like my reasoning for wanting them to be soldiers was like emphasizing how much war was like a part of that past. Because once we get to story 6, you'll realize like, I have a specific vision of how the apocalypse happened. Spoiler alert, it's just like war and, us destroying the world.
Woohoo!
But yeah, so like I definitely wanted to push that because like right now at this point in the story, we have like ideas of what the past used to be, and then eventually we're gonna like really just like dive into specifics and like really tie this story back to our current like modern day era. I think a lot of story 6 takes place like during the apocalypse.
Oh no.
So yeah, so you get to see a lot. You get to see someone who may have been the 45th president of the US, give some orders to destroy the world. So
Mm-mm.
it ties it back like very specifically. So I think this was kind of like the first hint of that. Like here's a bunch of statues of like these soldiers with like guns and stuff. And I think it's also just important that the cave ends up being destroyed. Just first of all, like this idea. I mean, Pana's not deliberately thinking like, oh, we need to like destroy the past of war and move on to like peace and stuff. Like, no, they actively just like blew up the cave. So like clearly not.
I
Um,
didn't think of it that way. I mean, I kind of personally, I thought it was a bit of an extreme reaction to be like, the only way out of here is for Waveskimmer to like destroy the roof of the cave, when personally I think it would have been much less like potentially dangerous for them to just like use Waveskimmer's tail to like sweep Varé and Kai aside. But obviously having the wider purpose of wanting to destroy this memorial to warfare is much
I
more
mean,
symbolic.
specifically why Waveskimmer didn't just like sweep them. I did write in the story like, oh, Waveskimmer was only the third most dangerous person in that cave.
But I mean, they could still use. They're a dragon. They are bigger. They can, like, they wouldn't kill them by sweeping them aside. Like, there's a difference between like physical strength and like willingness to kill.
No, he's still like, yes, he's a dragon, and like, sure, he has some physical strength. I still think, in my mind, like, in a fight, like, Varé would still beat him, even though he's a dragon. And like, Kai would still beat him too. So, like, I know that seems super unrealistic, but yeah, I just don't see Waveskimmer. I feel like a lot of dragons are, these like big tank-like creatures that just like, sweep aside armies and stuff. And that's just like not how I view Waveskimmer. He's like a little dog in a dragon body that isn't very capable of fighting.
Okay, I need to see textual evidence of this.
That was in there. I will point it out later.
No, no, not the statement that Waveskimmer is bad at fighting, but I need to see Waveskimmer be bad at fighting, because
Oh, okay.
being told that he's bad, or to me, I read it as like Waveskimmer's not willing to fight. But I mean, I like the tail sweep or something isn't necessarily a fighting move. It's like he has a tail, he knows how to use his tail. He hopes to not harm them with a gentle sweep, or I'm just seeing it from the mind of like he has a body with capabilities that humans just don't have. And he has no desire to harm, which would make him a bad fighter because he doesn't want to actually do damage. So he'd be holding back the whole time. But I just think if you demonstrated he has a complete lack of coordination or something, or if you demonstrated that he doesn't actually, maybe his spatial awareness is really bad and he like bumps into trees constantly or something. But being told that he's a bad fighter, I was not convinced that he would act like I wasn't convinced that he would like be useless necessarily, but like being willing to curb his own strength, I believed that.
Okay. I definitely need to like show it a lot more. I think. Part of what I was going off of is just like my own evidence of like me in sports being really bad. And I have some specific examples. So like, I'm a relatively large person. Like I've always been taller than everyone. There was one time in a basketball game in like elementary school, and I was like still taller than everyone else. So like theoretically, I had the physicality to excel and like always grab the rebound and never let anyone else get it. But anyway, I had the ball and like I accidentally knocked a kid over. So like I had the physicality to like knock this kid over, and then I dropped the ball and like helped him up, and his teammates took the ball and like scored. So like there's that. And when I played Quidditch, I was the keeper, and people would get past me all the time because even though I was like sometimes 2 feet taller than everyone else, I would still like be super unwilling to like push people and actually defend the goals in a physical way. So my mind was just kind of going based off of that, and like even though I have the physicality to like be a really good keeper, basketball player, like whatever, like that kind of unwillingness to really like engage in the physicality of those sports really like made me useless at them. That's part of how I was picturing Waveskimmer. Although I do recognize like I do need to put a lot of work into like showing that more. But that's just kind of how I'm thinking of him right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely get he's a soft-hearted creature, which I totally appreciate. I think dragons in many cases get a bad rap. I think not there are many kind and loving dragons in the world, and they're not enough of them in literature. Um,
All dragons are good dragons.
So I definitely appreciate Waveskimmer. I like that Waveskimmer is on the kind-hearted side. But yeah, I definitely was thinking like maybe I come from a more willing to push people away kind of. I mean, I hate contact sports. I avoid participating in contact sports. But I was coming from the mind of like if it's a choice between him and Pana being trapped in a cave, he'd still be willing to like do a tail sweep or like just run, have Pana climb on his back and run through them to the cave entrance, and like they might get pushed down or scrape a knee or something. But that was what I thought until Pana was like, no, shoot at the cave ceiling, which will definitely hurt them more because there's going to be falling rock and water.
Well, I think in their mind they were like, oh, the water's just gonna like sweep everyone out of the cave all gently. And like they have no idea. Because like again, this is like the first time they're even experiencing like water. So they're learning. They don't know what rocks do.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think the thought process needs to be written out for every scene like that of like, what do we do? I think A and B and C. Let's do that. Good plan.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was a little skeptical of like, there's easier solutions than melting the ceiling of the cave.
But are there cooler solutions? No, no, I take your point.
But no, definitely
Yeah,
a story. It makes for a better story.
that's what we're here for. So now, before we end, we want to pick out a favorite line that we each had and just talk briefly about it. So we're both trying to find our lines, and I found mine. So I'm going to talk about my line really quickly. Okay, so here it is. How easy it was to lose sight of all life on the earth. And this is when Pana realizes that they forgot the stone back at the waterfall cave area. And they're, super nervous about it. And they're like, oh, how could I forget? And Waveskimmer's like, it's not your fault. Like, people forget things, and you were being attacked by, an old friend. I just thought it was very poignant. And, like, yeah, we lose sight of a lot of things, like, all the time, and especially, like, this idea of all life on the earth. And we tend to, like, just be super focused on only that is around us. And I really want, like, part of this story is, like, pushing Panda to think more about things outside of the village and to experience all these other places and to learn about all these other people and just realize that everyone is going through things and that we need to like take care of everyone, which is like super important all the time, but like especially now just with all the news about like Ukraine and right now, and there's just a lot of conversation about like how do we help, like what do we do, and there's a lot of just people who are like no, like we shouldn't help at all, and like
What?
there's, I mean, Tucker Carlson's being played on like Russian media sites because he's, advocating for Russia,
Mm,
which is just insane. He's awful. But I think the point there is like, rather than go that route and like just be unconcerned about these people, and I'm not saying like, go in like guns ablazing, but like in our own lives, trying to just keep in mind what's happening in other places, and even if it feels irrelevant to us, everyone's life matters, and like we just need to think more about what other people are going through, even in other countries, like miles away from where we are, hundreds of miles away. So I think that's kind of what I wanted to convey with like this story in general, but like also this line. Yeah, we don't always do a great job of like thinking about other people and doing what's best for everyone because we do forget, but I want to try to not forget as much.
agreed. I definitely forget all of the time.
So what line do you have, Izzy?
Well, I gave it away. I chose the line, "We think it's a tomb," said a voice from behind them. That was Kai speaking when Pana and Waveskimmer enter the cave and are like, what the heck are all these statues?
Hmm.
And then, of course, Varé and Kai were hiding behind the statues and are like, haha. Um, but I chose that because of our previous tomb conversation. I wanted to be like, is this really a tomb? You think it's a tomb, but is it a tomb? It could be something else. But I just was in the contrarian mood, I guess.
Yeah. I think too what I wasn't realizing, Kai follows that up by saying like, this isn't like a tomb that you created, but like, you're dangerous, like you are still like dangerous and you like basically did the same thing back home. Not in like the construction, like Pana didn't go through and like carve out a bunch of stones and statues, but just the idea of like Kai believes that, Pana killed a bunch of people and like could have created a tomb like this size. So I guess like maybe I don't know, there's this idea of just like trying to show Pana what the other characters think they did in a way, like bringing them into this space and being like, we know you didn't kill the people in here, but like from our perspective, like you essentially committed like the same atrocity, sort of.
I mean, indirectly, they kind of did. Not that, obviously, the dragons made their own choice to murder, but if Pana hadn't been a curious cat, then they wouldn't have gone into the glowy blue cave and the dragons wouldn't have felt threatened. And even though, like, obviously the consequences of their actions were completely unforeseen, it was the consequences of Pana's specific actions.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, like maybe because we talked about why they think this is a tomb, and like maybe it is just like a projection of, Kai and Vari being like, we want Pana to see this as a tomb, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I definitely like that interpretation. It's manipulative, but definitely fitting their purposes. And also, probably Pana would be like, yep, I'll eat this right up. I feel guilty.
Indeed. Izzy, do you have any final overarching thoughts?
I think it's good that Pana and Varé have a complicated relationship that's not really a friendship anymore. But I appreciate the demonstration of, you know, complicated relationships because this, especially for a book that's targeted towards younger-ish audiences, not adults at least, it's valuable for kids to have an appreciation for, like, it's not always cut and dry of like we're friends and friendship lasts forever and nothing can ever truly come between us, which things happen sometimes that you can't plan for, and relationships are messy sometimes and complicated and painful. But I think it also, increases the understanding and empathy people have for other people. Like when I was a kid and other kids would be having drama in middle school, I'd be like, what stupid idiots. I was very mean in my head. I didn't talk to people like that way, but in my head I was very much like, this is a dumb problem and why are you even upset? Um, I was not understanding of the finer points of middle school melodrama, because I didn't really directly experience any myself because I was not involved in that kind of thing. But I think at least reading about it, you can understand there are some relationship things that just don't work out the way you hope they do, even if it's two people who aren't bad people. Things between people just don't always work out. Even if on both sides it's like, you're being stupid, why is this not working?
Yeah. I know I mean this isn't something that might come across in the writing. Like I have no idea if it does and probably not. Um but as I was going through this, like I really wanted to push this idea of both sides being wrong. Because I feel like there's this common phrase of like, oh, everyone's right from their own perspective. But like, what happens when those perspectives are wrong? So, like, I'm not really interested in justifying everyone's perspective. I really just want to push this idea that, like, maybe like both parties are just wrong. So, and like, again, I don't know if that necessarily comes across, like, especially with Pana, I don't know. And I guess that is part of like the whole like cave breaking thing, just this idea of like Pana not understanding the risks sometimes and the potential harm to others. I mean, definitely more like with Varé, you see that like she's definitely wrong, even though she thinks she's right. But I guess just like I mean, a lot of our conversation this time has been like about how these characters have different motives and like where they're coming from and how oftentimes like I need to like show that a little bit more. So I think just the advice that I would give is to like really think about your characters, what you want them to do, what you want them to be like, and try to just be mindful of how you present that. Because at the end of the day, like you might have ideas about a character, and if it's not in the text, like it's not in the text. So I don't think it's as simple as doing, a J.K. Rowling and going on Twitter and saying this is what happened if it didn't happen in the text. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah. And I think, I feel sometimes I've read some things into Varé or into Pana where I don't know if it's your intention for how they're supposed to be thinking or feeling, but leaving some openness for how your readers might interpret things that are different from your intention but could add a lot more depth to the whole reading.
Indeed.
I look forward to seeing both sides being wrong. I haven't seen enough, I think, by this story for to be convinced.
Yeah, and I don't think Pana ultimately is shown to be wrong in any way, if I remember correctly. I don't think I succeeded at that idea, but I mean, definitely like they do some stuff, and like I don't think they're like this 100% like pure character. But we'll see going forward what happens.
Indeed. And with that, have a wonderful day, night, afternoon, whatever time you happen to be listening to this, listeners. And don't forget to check out the link to our Patreon in the description of this episode.
Yep. Thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.